So thank you all very much for attending and welcome. Thank you for joining me and Adam Kahane, who'll have an opportunity to introduce himself in just a moment for this session, Facilitating Breakthrough, an opportunity to meet Adam, hear something about his new book, How to Remove Obstacles, Bridge Differences and Move Forward Together, and to explore some of the issues raised with him, with me, with each other. As I say, it's a 60-minute session. Thank you for joining. It's going to be a very straightforward format. We're going to find out a little bit about who's in the room, and then I'm going to invite Adam to introduce himself and the book. I'm going to make a few remarks and ask a few questions, and then we'll give you a chance to talk to each other in breakouts before we invite you also to put some questions to Adam or to either of us. So it's largely just a conversation, no fancy tools or nothing like that, but we are going to start with a Zoom tool, not a very fancy tool at all. We're going to start with a quick poll to find out who's in the room. So please do go ahead if you see that. Let us know where in the world are you located? How would you describe your experience as a facilitator? And of course, have you read Adam's book? And in case there's any of you who respond, what book? There's a link in the chat. That's okay, you're also welcome. There is a book, by the way. So just another moment or two, 25 out of 28 have responded. Anybody else? 26. The other two are probably you and me, Adam, so I'll share the results. No surprises there, most from North America, Latin America, and Caribbean. Welcome to those of you who are not, like me, Europe, MENA, and Asia. Well, there's a few of us, but none from Africa or Australasia. Mostly very experienced or somewhat experienced, but about half not very or not at all in facilitation. And a few of you have read all of the book. Some of you have read some of it. Most of you have read none of it, or didn't even know that there was a book. Well, the good news is that there is a book, and we're going to hear all about it. So I think it's time to hand over to you, Adam. Please go ahead, tell us about yourself, tell us about the book.
Well, thank you, Martin. This is a fun experience for me. I've been facilitating full-time for 30 years, and I've just come literally 6 minutes ago from a session that went relatively well, better than the previous sessions, with a group of democracy activists in the US trying to make a plan about what they need to do to avoid things collapsing. So I am a very experienced facilitator, and yet this is the first time I'm at an IAF meeting, and it's it's fun for me even just to listen to the beginning. And a year ago, when I was in the middle of writing this book, I reached out, I think on Twitter or LinkedIn. I had some questions about the field and about resources, and you, Martin, answered very generously and kindly. So I don't know what the right expression is, but sort of the prodigal son come home, or anyhow, something or other. So thank you, and thanks also for being willing to run this session with me. So I'm going to take just 7 minutes to try to summarize the book, and then you and I can talk about it a little bit, and then we can talk about it, all of us. I'm from Montreal. I have a completely inadequate training for this work, physics and economics. Worked at Shell in the late 1980s in London, where this idea that the role of strategic planners wasn't to make plans, but to facilitate executives to make plans. That was my first introduction to facilitation. But it was in 1991, exactly 30 years ago, almost to the day, while I was still a Shell employee, that I was invited to facilitate a group of activists in South Africa who were trying to make plans for the transition from apartheid to democracy, and who wanted to use the Shell strategic planning methodology, the so-called scenario method. And as I was the youngest and most expendable member of the department, I was dispatched. And that was my first time facilitating, actually the first time I'd ever heard of this idea that you could get leaders from across a whole social system, in that case, a country, but you could say the same about a community, an organization, a region. In the South African case, it was black and white, opposition and establishment, business, government, civil society, trade unionists, men and women, left and right. It was my first experience with facilitating that kind of group. And anyhow, to make a long story short, I resigned from Shell and immigrated from London to Cape Town and have been doing this work full-time ever since. And with that speciality, I guess, I don't know formally what it's called in the IAF world, but I would call it, yeah, whole system or multi-stakeholder, facilitating whole system or multi-stakeholder problem solving. And I've done this all day, every day for 30 years. And I'm now part of a reasonably large global organization called Rios Partners, which does this speciality of diverse groups working together on complex challenges. Let me just give you one example to try to ground this on something so you'll know what I'm talking about before I go to the abstraction of the book. And so the example I'll give you was 4 years ago in Colombia, the country of Colombia, after the signing of the peace accords. My colleagues and I were facilitating a workshop of leaders from a particularly troubled part of Southwest Colombia, which meant sugarcane executives and nonprofit organization and indigenous people and Afro-Colombians and members of the just demobilized guerrilla FARC and academics. And if you'd watched a video of the workshop, I think you would probably 100% of the things we did were things that many of you, if not all of you, do every day, starting in a circle with people introducing themselves, lots of small group work with Post-its and Lego serious play, and walks in pairs and breaks and meals together and storytelling, etc. And at the end of the first day, a man, one of the participants who I knew, a man named Pacho Duru, who had just the week before been appointed the president of the Commission for Truth, Reconciliation, and Non-Repetition. So a big job in Colombia, part of the implementation of peace accords. I was surprised he was there at this local workshop, but he said he was interested. He had come because he was interested in how do you facilitate collaboration across deep difference. And I knew him and respected him a lot. And at the end of the first day, he comes running up to me, says, "Adam, I see what you're doing." And I said, "Well, Pacho, what is it that I'm doing?" And he said, "You are removing the obstacles to the expression of the mystery." So Pacho is a Jesuit priest, a former head of the Jesuits, pretty serious intellectual theologian. So I knew he was telling me something important, but I must say I didn't get exactly what it was, except that it mattered to him. And we spent several hours talking at dinner, and his English isn't very good and my Spanish is worse. I was none the wiser. But this really was the inspiration for the book, this comment, "You are removing the obstacles to expression of the mystery." And I spent 4 years trying to understand what he meant, because I had an intuition that it was something very important. And I think what he meant was two things, or my current understanding, and these are the big ideas in the book. The first is that although most people think facilitation is about getting people to do things, and even facilitators, when we relax and are at the bar, we talk about getting people to do things, but I don't think it's about that at all. At least my experience is I can't get anybody to do anything at all. So I think it's about removing obstacles. And secondly, what is it about removing obstacles to? I would say it's about removing obstacles to contribution, connection, and equity. That I currently think that about 80% of the things I worry about as a facilitator, or I focus on, are removing obstacles to connection, contribution, and equity. There's a grander way of saying that same sentence, which I elaborate on at length in my book because I think it's helpful, is removing obstacles to power, love, and justice. So I'm arguing in the book that that's what facilitation is really all about. So just a few more sentences about what the book's saying. The book is proposing a new general theory of and practice of facilitation. It's not suggesting a new way of facilitating. I'm pretty sure that all great facilitators, maybe all of you or some of you, I'm pretty sure Martin facilitates more or less in the way I'm describing. So I'm not offering a new way of facilitating, but I am offering a new way of thinking about facilitating. As about removing obstacles to power, love, and justice, and in more detail to cycling between the transformative facilitation, or facilitation that has the capacity to contribute to the transformation of, or the addressing of complex problematic situations, requires cycling between what I call vertical facilitation and what I call horizontal facilitation. Anyway, we can get into more in the question. Let me not go on longer, but that's what the book's about, and I'm looking forward to the conversation about it because all of you are interested in facilitation. So yeah, thank you, Mark.
I'd better unmute myself. Thank you, Adam. I first came across your writing, Adam, when I saw you presenting transformational strategy. No, what was
Transformative scenario planning, I think.
Transformative scenario planning, thank you. Which was maybe something like 10 years ago. I saw you presenting that at the RSA in London. And I read that and was inspired to read your subsequent books as they came out. And one of the things I've appreciated most about them is that they speak of some of the most challenging, wicked problems any of us might come across as facilitators. And they illustrate that actually what it takes to respond to these is pretty much what I and my colleague facilitators do on a daily basis. It comes down ultimately to people in a room together. Even if they're not in a room, they might be in a forest, wherever they are. It comes down to a few people together having to find a way to deal with it. And I've found that very inspiring. So I've always thought it would be a great thing to be able to get you to do a keynote or some such session at an IAF conference. So I'm glad this opportunity has arisen, and I'm grateful that you've taken the opportunity. On this book, and I have a copy here, I do recommend it, by the way. I love the Kurt Lewin quote that you used: "There's nothing as practical as a good theory." And there's nothing like 30 years of practice for developing a good theory. So thank you for sharing yours here. I also have 30-something years of facilitation experience, and I think of myself much more of a practitioner than a theoretical type, although actually when I think back to my early years with ICA in the 80s and 90s, we were actually steeped in theory. ICA began in the 60s, came out of theology and philosophy long before it got into sociology or psychology or anything like that. So I've had 30-odd years steeped in the theory and practice of ICA and its top facilitation methodology. That was originally conceived as social methods designed to complement the earlier spirit methods and study methods. So some of my questions will be coming from that angle, and it's that background, I think, that means, that means how much your book appeals to me. You've talked about truth, love, and is it
power,
truth? No, it's power, love, and justice. Thank you. A trio, and ICA has always been very big on three-part models, not least the economic, political, and cultural dynamics of the social process that gave ICA its name. but they all ultimately seem to me to boil down to being, knowing, and doing, head, heart, and hand, which I'm sure many of you will have come across. That seems to me to map very nicely to power, love, and justice. So I find that encouraging. And I also appreciate very much your notion in the book of facilitation as not being values free, but being values laden, that facilitation has a purpose. Learning to live together in a way that love, power, and justice enhance and support each other. That resonates very strongly with me as well, because even though for a long time I've been very much in the business of facilitation and promoting facilitation, I see facilitation as a means to an end, not an end to itself. In ICA's language, facilitation is a means to human development, or a means to bringing balance to the three dynamics of the social process. So all of that resonates with me. So anyway, let me put a couple of questions to you, if I may, before we invite the rest of the group to respond to you. I'm particularly curious about your background as a physicist, because I heard you mention that in one of your previous talks about this book. And I've met lots of facilitators who've come from lots of different backgrounds, and I'm not sure I've met a physicist before. So I wonder, just how did that come about? And how do you think it's influenced your practice, or your theory for that matter, if at all?
So let me answer your question, but just let me back up to say something I think's important and wanted to say that was triggered by your comment about that one of the things required to address the complex challenges of our time is the sort of thing that you and other IAF people already do. So this is, in a way, the bigger message of the book, which is that in my thinking, the world needs more and better collaboration, and therefore more and better facilitation. And so part of what I'm trying to do in this book is to give a bigger definition of facilitation, that it's not simply the fellow or the person at the making jokes at the flip chart, but it is anybody who helps a group work together to affect change. You know, I think I said this to you, Martin, that in French, the word for facilitator is animateur, but I've always found that a bit of a funny word, because animateur is also the word used to describe the people at Club Med who organize the games on the beach. So at least in French, it always has this, yeah, not that there's anything wrong with playing games on the beach, but it has this entertainer angle. And I think there's a bigger contribution that facilitators can make. And one of the fun things I've done the past few weeks is I've interviewed 3 world leaders who I consider in one way or another to be great facilitators. The videos will be on the Rio's website in a few days. And one of them was Cristiana Figueres, who was the head of or the Secretary General of the UNFCCC for the 6 COPs up to and including Paris. And it was an incredible conversation. And I think she's a brilliant facilitator. So to rethink what a facilitator is part of what I'm trying to do. And it was a mind-blowing description of what did it take to get unanimous agreement amongst 192 countries over years. Okay, to answer your question, I don't think physics has anything at all to do with my theory. It has a lot to do with my theorizing. So my day job is working as a facilitator on these projects I referred to. And then every few years, I step back and try to say what has happened here. And in particular, most of the stories are of times when I thought I knew what to do and I did it and it didn't work. And I had to wonder, what am I missing here? What's inadequate in my theory and practice? So that idea that we learn through experimentation and through observation, including or especially observations about what we ourselves are doing, and this appetite or enjoyment of really trying to tease out what's the simplest and most elegant way of describing it. And in the book, I ridiculously or helpfully have a huge matrix with 10 5 pairs of outer moves and 5 inner shifts that I argue cover a lot of the ground. But just the act of that abstraction is what I learned from physics, nothing else.
Thank you. And you talk about breakthrough facilitation as you describe it as being an unconventional approach, contrasted with the conventional approach that you describe as all vertical or all horizontal. And the way you describe that does resonate with me, but I'm curious because I've come to see at least one of the big divides between different schools or different approaches of facilitation as the extent to which the facilitator allows themselves to become involved in or even take responsibility for process versus content.
Yeah.
I think all of us would agree that the facilitator doesn't get involved in content. That would make us a facilitator or something other than a facilitator. But there's quite a division, I think, between those of us who think it's our job to lead the process, to take people somewhere, or to at least remove the obstacles to them getting there, and others who might simply observe and intervene in order to address dysfunctions, if you like. So I'm wondering, how do those two distinctions relate to each other or compare to each other? If you
so I think this is where the theory can be illuminating. As Lewin said, nothing is practical as good theory. And I'll just back up one step and then come to the specific question you raised. So I think when you're writing a book about groups, you immediately, or working with groups, you come to a grammatical problem immediately, which is that the word group in English is both a singular noun and a plural noun. I didn't realize that, but if you look it up, it's true. So it's correct to say the group is, and you can also say the group are. And I actually think that's the big distinction. There are schools of facilitation. I believe the dominant school of facilitation treats the group as singular. And it focuses on what is the task of the group as a whole. And you know it's a vertical facilitator when they refer to, well, thank you for your contribution, but can we get back to what's best for the group or the organization or the community? Could you leave your agenda at the door? Could you be a team player? That's how I learned facilitation. Now, so I think that's the single most common, and I call it the vertical facilitation. There's a second way, which is become also very common. It's the opposite. It says, no, this hierarchy of the larger over the smaller or the higher over the lower is not helpful, illegitimate, oppressive, and we need to focus on the group R, and what that means, the perspectives, the interests, the choices of each a member of the group. What I call horizontal. Now, if you think about it for a while, you'll realize this is not a choice. It's a polarity in the sense of Barry Johnson's elegant books on polarities. There shouldn't be a vertical facilitation faction and a horizontal facilitation faction, just like there's not an inhaling faction and an exhaling faction. You have to do both, not at the same time, but alternately. So the other idea in this book is that what I'm calling transformative facilitation cycles between, does not choose between, but cycles back and forth, the vertical and the horizontal. And the two examples you gave are very pertinent because I say there's 5 dimensions. You've mentioned 2 of them. And so I'll just refer to those 2, but there's another 3. The first is, to what extent or when does the facilitator need to be standing outside the group and helping the group stand outside its situation, go to the balcony, as Heifetz says, and when does facilitator need to stand inside the group, taking responsibility for being part of the system? So that's one. I don't think that's a choice. I think it's a polarity, just like inhaling and exhaling. And to choose one or the other is always a mistake. And the second example you give, I'm really quite fascinated that both of your examples they're 2 of the 5 polarities. The other one is the polarity between directing, like a conductor of an orchestra, and accompanying, like an accompanist. So just to take those two examples, I believe both of those are polarities, not choices. And if it's really true that facilitators are arguing about which is better, I think that's a fundamental error, just like the error of arguing about whether it's better to inhale or exhale. And there's three others.
I also get frustrated when I hear facilitators arguing about which kind of facilitation is the ultimate or the authentic or the real facilitation. I take the view that facilitation is a much broader church than those people would appreciate, and actually it's all facilitation, and what's appropriate depends on the context and on the circumstance, which I suppose is what you're saying here.
Well, I'm not exactly saying, yeah, I'm saying it's all contextual, but I'm arguing or postulating, hypothesizing that all great facilitation involves cycling between the vertical and horizontal,
right?
Consciously or unconsciously, and yes, it's all contextual in the sense that it's all about paying attention to what's needed right now. But it's not to say that there's circumstances where it should be 100% vertical or 100% horizontal. So it's not exactly what you said. I'm deliberately being provocative or cantankerous so that you feel that you've done something.
Thank you. On the role of the facilitator, then, you refer to removing obstacles as a key to the role of the facilitator. So I'm wondering, to what extent is it the role of the facilitator to remove obstacles for the group, or to what extent is it the role of the facilitator to support, enable, facilitate the group to remove their own obstacles? Is that one of these polarities as well?
That's a good question. For me, the definition I'm using of a facilitator is somebody who helps a group of people collaborate to affect change. So it has both collaboration, we're working together, not some of us bossing others around, and we're trying to create change. So that already is less than 100% of the circumstances that facilitators might find themselves in. And yes, I guess I would say to help the group remove obstacles, which often involves things members of the group have to do. So that, and a lot of what I think facilitators worry about, design, process, convening, how to organize chairs, are all things that I think are informed by this hypothesis that most of what we're doing is removing obstacles to contribution, connection, and equity. So I think it's a both and. I'm just looking at my I think there's so it is related to the polarities. It's related again to the directing versus accompanying. To what extent am I going to say, okay, we're going to put all the chairs in a circle because that's what's needed now, and when is it time to say, organize yourself as you think most useful, and I'll help you move the chairs.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one more because I realize I'm using up a lot of time. I want to give all the rest of us in the room a chance to talk to each other and raise some questions for you as well. You mentioned already that you want to broaden the understanding of the role of the facilitator. It's not just the person at the flip chart, in a meeting. I'm with you 100% there. I wonder then, when you write in this book and previous books about your work as a facilitator, a lot of it is not just in meetings, it's in the preparing for meetings and the following up of meetings and creating the conditions for effective meetings. This relates to my earlier session with Michael Ambiorn, actually, if any of you were there, on the intersection between facilitation and communication, particularly mass communication. I wonder, therefore, and I'm not sure there's an answer to this, but I mean, IAF is very clear in its competency framework, that there's a lot more to facilitating than just leading a meeting. It's all, you have to be prepared to manage a series of meetings. A larger, more longer, more complex process is all part of facilitation. Where then do you draw the line, if there is a line to be drawn, between the role of the facilitator and the role of the facilitative project manager or the facilitative leader?
Yeah, well, I'm not drawing a line, and that I'm arguing that facilitation is the larger field. It's everything involved in helping a group of people collaborate to effect change. And that includes things that leaders and managers and project managers and coaches and consultants and team members and friends all do. And so now you don't have to do all of that. You can say, no, I only hang the flip chart paper. Somebody else is doing another part of it. That's fine. One person doesn't have to do everything. And in fact, almost all the examples I give in the book are of teams of facilitators. But part of what I'm trying to do here is get the ethic of facilitation more generally into management and leadership. That yes, there's sometimes when leading involves bossing people about, but I think the applicability of that is getting narrower and narrower, and that what we call facilitation, which only is partly about meetings, is a more general competency.
Absolutely.
Martin, I would like to ask you a question, if you'll permit me.
Go ahead.
So I don't know you very well, but I've read a lot of the things you've written, and I know about your long history in IAF and also in ICA. And I guess I would say I know enough to be respectful. And we're, I guess, somewhere around the same age. And yeah, we're both getting on a little bit. And so my question to you is, having been in the field as a field for probably longer than me, what's changed? What's changed in your lifetime in facilitation? I mean, what's changed that really matters? Some things are maybe the same as the first day, but what's different? I'm really curious.
So I guess that depends what really matters to you, doesn't it?
Well, what matters to you is...
Interesting question. I would say, I mean, as a field, I think that in essence, facilitation hasn't changed, and in essence won't change if you distill it right down, to the purest essence. Obviously, it's changed enormously, especially in the last year or two, in terms of some of the tools and techniques that are available to facilitators, some of the spaces, digital and online spaces, which didn't exist when I began, but they've evolved, during that time. I suppose the same can be said for the multiplicity of different approaches that have emerged. I mean, I think ICA was really a pioneer in the field in the 60s and 70s. There were others that go back earlier as well, but the field wasn't really described as facilitation until the 80s, I think. And since IF was founded in the early 90s, and subsequently, there's been a huge flowering of different schools, different approaches to facilitation, different communities. Like, for example, we heard Mary Alice Arthur earlier on from the Art of Hosting community. Liberating structures is is new kid on the block, but there are many others. So the profession, the field, I think, has matured and fragmented too, to an extent, but that's perhaps not a bad thing.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to keep it very brief, but we do want to give you an opportunity to talk to each other for a few minutes before you put some questions to Adam or even me. I'm going to put you in groups of 2 or 3 for about 3 or 4 minutes, and invite you to share any reflections and in particular any questions that arise for you from what you've heard. Enjoy. Welcome back. Welcome back. So I hope that 3 or 4 minutes was long enough to at least make a brief connection with each other and to chew over a little bit of what you've heard. We're going to take about 15 minutes now for questions and reflections discussion. Who would like to share any question or reflection that has emerged for you from the discussion so far? Please go ahead. Alia, yes, please.
Yes, hello. So, of course, we could spin our wheels forever about defining things and categorizing things, but I'm so curious to know, Adam, your perspective on the difference between a transformation facilitator and like a change facilitator. Because those words mean so many things in so many different fields, but are you seeing some differences enough to define transformation and change? Yeah, like how are you seeing that?
Thank you. You're muted, Adam.
I don't think I have anything much to add on that. What's more interesting to me than there is between change and transformation, I think your definitions, Molly, are probably better than mine. What's more interesting to me than that is the difference between collaboration and other ways of getting things done. So I'm arguing that facilitator is somebody who helps people collaborate to affect change or transformation. And for me, the emphasis is on the word collaboration rather than forcing or rather than manipulating.
Thank you. So maybe I can ask a follow-up question very briefly, because this is a question I had prepared for you and didn't have time to ask, which was about what it takes to be transformational. In ICA's top methodology, the key, or at least one of the keys to transformational change, is to support and challenge the group to articulate what is holding its obstacles in place. ICA refers to them as contradictions, underlying contradictions, the root causes, if you like, of the obstacles. I wonder to what extent, I don't think you refer to that in the book, to what extent is that?
No, I think that's the same direction, and I certainly, I'm pretty confident there's congruence between the ICA philosophy and the Rios philosophy, and a few common antecedents. But yes, it would be in the area of changing the structure of the system in order to change the results that the system produces.
Thank you. Mara.
Hey, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Now we can't. You just
you just muted yourself.
I'm sorry. I didn't read the book, but what's resonating with me, and I don't know if I've understood this, what you're saying, but I'm linking a couple of things together, and it's the concept of self-organizing. So like in an open space, the person holding the space isn't directing what the participants are doing or talking about, but they're making the space available and putting the parameters around how to collaborate. And the other thing is, as a Scrum Master working in the Agile world, my job is to help the team now not need me anymore. In fact, I think good leaders do themselves out of a job because they're starting to bring the tools and the methods and the values and the behaviors for self-leadership, self-organization, so that now I can go help other teams or other parts of other communities.
So yes and yes. I love open space, and what I like is this idea that our job is to work on the boundaries, the container, the structure, the process, how the chairs are organized, and that the work on solving the problem is to be done by the group. I don't think it has to be as undirective as open space. And yes, of course, I'm committed to building capacity, but that doesn't mean all groups can be purely self-directed groups. That's another polarity. We keep coming back to this polarity. I'm just curious that it's recurring in this conversation between directing and accompanying. And I think both are required at different times.
Thank you. Any more?
I have a comment along these lines. I live in and have for a long time, 20 years now, in an eco village in Mexico. And the eco village movement is an alternative kind of approach. And it is an absolute hotbed for conflict and confusion and bad decision making, no decision making, good decision making. Facilitation is a needed skill, but usually not one that people come in. They come in with all their aspirations for a different kind of world, but not so much about the facilitation aspect. And I find that that now more than ever, there's a need, after the changes that were brought about by pandemic and all that, that as one of the few formally recognized as facilitators within this community, that it is definitely in need of transformation of some of the ways of what we do and how we do it and all that, that I am going to be sort of both, not judge and jury, but, I am involved. There's no other way to look at it other than I'm involved and I have some skills that can be helpful. And this conversation and Adam's books are inspiring to me in this way too. But I recognize that I have kind of this inhibition, which up until now has served me very well. That I used to tell people when I was training facilitation, your fingerprints should not be all over the final product. And I still think that's true. But then this navigating between the vertical and the horizontal is tricky.
So this is very interesting to me. And Beatrice, haven't we met?
I interviewed you with.
Yes, I was at wasn't I at your eco village? Or maybe we did it by.
We did it by phone.
Okay, anyhow, I thought, how many Beatrice Briggs are there in Mexico that are living in an eco village? I thought.
I think I'm unique in that sense.
Okay, so let me take advantage of your question, because for me this is the most interesting chapter in the book. Logically, it doesn't have to be the penultimate chapter, but it is, because for me it's the heart. It's the thing I wanted to really end on before the conclusion, and that is this polarity between standing outside and standing inside, or as Heifetz says, the balcony and the dance floor. And to me, this is something quite fundamental and deeply challenging, at least for me. I like being an outsider. It's a very comfortable place for me. And it's useful to be an outsider. It's certainly, but I think it can be taken too far. And when I look at my fancy table, what happens when you take standing outside too far? You end up with coldness and abdication. And I actually think your experience in the community is an important one. So I'm going to emphasize this because to me it's the sharpest edge in the book. It's like the difference between you're in your car, you're phoning home, you can say I'm in traffic or I am traffic. And to put it another way, if you define yourself as entirely outside the system, or if you stand outside and only take that pole, then your contribution will be limited. At a minimum, what you're doing in the group is part of what's going on. That's the minimum. But I think it goes beyond that. And the example I give in the book, the story in the penultimate chapter, is from working all around the world, coming back to Canada, facilitating a group of First Nations leaders, one of whom said at the beginning of the workshop, I don't trust you. And I realized for me to say I'm outside when actually I am the person in that particular group who is a representative of the colonial project, saying, I have this expertise and this is what I think you need to do in terms of the process, is actually replicating exactly the problem they were trying to change. And so it was only when I admitted, yes, to some extent, I'm part of this situation. I'm going to just say it one more way. You can tell this is actually my favorite subject. But I had a colleague, Bill Tolbert, who said to me once, you know that expression from the 1960s, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. He said, that's actually not the interesting point. The interesting point is if you're not part of the problem, you can't be part of the solution except from outside by force. So I'm just pushing on this because I think this is the most uncomfortable edge for facilitators is, in what way are we part of the situation that the team is trying to change? Maybe very small, maybe very large. But if we refuse to acknowledge it, I think our capacity will be constrained. Let me put it that way. Thank you for allowing me. You got my message about asking me that question so that I could be on my favorite soapbox. Thanks.
Thank you.
Charlotte, please go ahead.
Oh, this is a very interesting point that I'm allowed to jump in the conversation because I could just come from the Michael Wilkinson workshop, as I said earlier, and he's got some great points about the energy that you as a facilitator bring into the room when you facilitate a session, and you know that also, whether conscious or unconsciously, you, with the way that you enter the room, you signal your attitude towards the group. That's a very short description of it. So I'm really curious about this being outside, being included or not discussion. I think it's very interesting. Personally, I'm more of the conviction that everybody is always included, whether or not they see themselves as included or not, whether or not they're physically present or not. But that's that's probably more of a spiritual dimension that I bring in here. I'm aware of that, and I think it's one of the things that are really, really difficult to address in the facilitation community and everywhere else we work with facilitation, because at least in Denmark, I have this really strong sense that is one of the things that make a lot of people move away from facilitation because they don't want to, all this spiritual thingy going on, they're like, oh no, that's nothing to do with me, and I'm not a spiritual person, and I think it's about it's more of a meta pattern that we are all a part of in the countries and the regions where we live and work. That there's some meta patterns or some societal patterns that govern also the way that we work as facilitators. Yeah.
So I agree with you very much, and I guess the other advantage or the other inheritance I get of coming to physics is I'm able to talk about exactly what you've just said, but in a not spiritual language. Martin, maybe because I suppose people will disappear to other events, maybe I can do my part of the closing, and then I'll turn back to you.
Just one moment, if I may, before you do. I've just put a couple of links in the chat, which may be of interest to people. The first is to a longtime ICA colleague of mine who wrote a book a year or two ago called Toward a Compassionate Civilization, which speaks very much to the responsibility of facilitators who to be a part of the system and to use their facilitation skills to bring about change, particularly in relation to the climate crisis, patriarchy, violence, and so forth. And partly inspired by that, IF England and Wales is leading a session next week as part of International Facilitation Week, which I put a link to as well. And you may also be interested to join that. You'll all be very welcome anyway. So yes, Adam, please do go ahead.
Yes, so one request, and then I want to propose a checkout. So the request is I'm wanting this book to be useful to people in the facilitation community, so I'd be grateful if you'd spread the word and leave a review. These things actually matter a lot to books succeeding or failing. As for the checkout, I propose the following. I learned this from the Session Lab people last week. That's a real technological innovation in facilitation. So I'm going to invite everybody to type something into chat, but don't press the return button until I say so. So we'll all press it at the same time. So what I invite you to put in the chat is one thing you're thinking about now. Maybe it's a question, a wondering, a confusion, an insight. One thing you're thinking about now that you weren't thinking about 58 minutes ago. So write that in the chat, but don't press the return key. So one thing you're thinking about now that you weren't thinking about 58 minutes ago, maybe it's unclear, maybe it's a wondering, a confusion, a question. I'm going to do the same. Okay, so type your haha, your aha, your insight, and then I'm going to count down 3, 2, 1, and we're going to all press return, and we're going to have a chat waterfall. 3, 2, 1, go.
Boom.
Very fun. So we'll include that with the video.
And you
back
can all,
to you, Martin.
thank you, Adam. You can all download the chat for yourselves if you like. You won't have had time to read that, but the 3 little dots to the top right of where you enter in the chat, if you click on that, you have the option to save the chat for yourself. Thank you very much indeed, Adam, for a very thoughtful, stimulating and inspiring book and a very thoughtful, stimulating and inspiring session. And thank you all for joining. We're out of time, but it's been a pleasure. I hope we'll see you again in IF, Adam. You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave from this environment. Thank you all very much indeed. And now it's time to return to the main stage for whatever comes next. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin, also.
Thanks,
Bye.
Martin.
Nice to see you again, Beatrice.
Yes, likewise.
Bye, everyone.